All right, so today we're jumping into a really powerful sermon that breaks down the book of Jude from the Bible. Now, if you've never read Jude, it's short, but man, is it intense. It's got one major focus, this idea of apostasy, what it is, why it's a danger, and what believers are supposed to do about it. And really, the entire sermon is built around this one single idea. The most dangerous attacks don't come from the outside, they come from within. So right off the bat, the argument isn't about, atheists or skeptics attacking the church. No, it's about something way more insidious, a threat, a betrayal that comes from the inside. So to really get our heads around this, we're going to walk through the sermon's argument in 5 steps. First, this idea of a war for truth. Then we'll look at the enemy within. After that, we'll get into a profile of an apostate, look at 3 big historical judgments, and finally, wrap up with the call to contend.
Okay, first up, a war for truth. This is the central idea of the whole sermon. The speaker's point is that this isn't just some friendly debate over ideas. No, it's framed as an all-out spiritual war, a siege against the very foundations of faith.
And here's the real twist. The sermon argues that truth is being absolutely mocked, minimized, and mangled, but not by the people you'd expect, not by atheists or outsiders. The claim is that the biggest damage is being done by people inside the faith, people who might even be quoting scripture but are twisting its meaning. That internal betrayal, that's what's presented as the most devastating threat of all.
And this line, wow, it really sums up the whole tone. In this war, silence is surrender, compromise is treason. I mean, there's no gray area there, right? It sets up this incredibly urgent black and white conflict where just staying quiet isn't an option. The stakes are presented as being astronomically high.
Okay, so if there's an enemy within, who exactly are we talking about? Well, the sermon gives them a very specific name, apostates. So let's dig into what that actually means according to this teaching.
Now, this is a really crucial point. In the context of this sermon, apostasy isn't somebody just having doubts or going through a crisis of faith. It's defined as something much more serious, a willful, conscious, and totally deliberate choice to walk away from God and the faith. It's an intentional act.
So how do they operate? Well, a huge point in the sermon is their method. They creep in unnoticed. They don't just kick down the front door. The idea is that they use stealth and sabotage. Apparently, the original Greek word used in the text gives this image of a sneaky lawyer or someone slipping back into a city they were exiled from. It's all about infiltration from the inside, not a head-on attack.
And of course, the sermon uses these classic biblical metaphors that we've probably all heard before. Tares among the wheats, wolves in sheep's clothing. It's all meant to drive home the same point. This threat is deceptive. They look and sound like they belong, but their real intention is to cause destruction from within.
So, okay, if this enemy is so deceptive and sneaky, how is anyone supposed to identify them? Well, the sermon doesn't just name the threat, it actually gives a 3-part profile, a kind of diagnostic tool for spotting an apostate.
And it boils down to these 3 things. A corrupt character, which is described as ungodly, corrupt conduct, called licentious, and a counterfeit creed, which is a denial of Christ. So you're looking at who they are, how they act, and what they really believe.
So let's unpack that. First up is character. The sermon uses the term ungodly, which comes from a Greek word, eisebia. And this doesn't just mean, being a bad person. It's deeper than that. It means living without any real worship, reverence, or fear of God. So someone could go through all the religious motions, but that internal heart of worship, it's just not there.
Okay, second is their conduct, which is labeled licentious. The Greek word here is asogeia, and it basically means shameless, unrestrained sin. The sermon explains it as someone taking the idea of God's grace and twisting it into a license to do whatever they want. It's like turning a get-out-of-jail-free card into permission to just keep committing crime. And finally, there's their creed, which is called counterfeit. And this is really interesting, because the sermon argues it's not always an outright, I deny Jesus kind of thing. It's way more subtle. It's a refusal to actually submit to his authority. So they might say all the right words, but in their own lives, they've basically crowned themselves king. They're in charge, not him.
Okay, so that's a pretty heavy 3-part diagnosis. To really hammer home the seriousness of it all, the sermon then brings up 3 big historical examples from the Old Testament, all cited in the book of Jude, that are meant to serve as these stark warnings about the consequences.
And you can see the pattern laid out really clearly. You've got the apostate Jews in the desert, whose sin was unbelief, and the judgment was destruction. You've got the apostate angels,
whose sin was rebellion, and they got eternal chains. And then the apostate Gentiles of Sodom and Gomorrah. Their sin was gross immorality, and the judgment was eternal fire. The point is, in each case, there's a specific sin that leads to a very severe judgment.
And then the sermon brings it right into the modern day. It connects those ancient warnings to things happening right now, listing off some really specific contemporary events that the speaker categorizes as modern-day apostasy. We're talking about things like pastors allegedly defending Planned Parenthood, churches having Star Wars Christmas services, giving out tattoos live during a service, a mega church hosting a same-sex proposal, and even a minister asking for money for a private jet.
Okay, so after diagnosing the problem, profiling this internal enemy, and laying out all these historical stakes, what's the point of it all? This is where the sermon pivots to its proposed solution, its big call to action.
And it comes down to this four-part strategy for how to, in the words of Jude, contend for the faith. It's an active thing. First, be true to the word yourself. Second, support preachers who are teaching it without compromise. Third, be a witness, not just in what you say, but in how you live. And finally, invest in the next generation of truth-tellers. It's a full-circle approach.
So, the sermon itself presents a very stark, very clear-cut perspective on the spiritual battle. It's pretty black and white. But stepping back from it, it leaves us with a really big, thought-provoking question for today. In a world that's constantly changing, where exactly is the line between a faith that's simply evolving and a faith that's being abandoned?